I personally think a lot of the insights come from the guests I interview on What Happens Next. But here's the interesting thing. Our most watched videos are the ones that feature me doing a deeper dive into a subject where we think about what happens next. And in this video, I want to share with you the top 3 videos of 2025 that really had an impact on people's lives and were watched thousands and tens of thousands of times, just to see whether, particularly if we're approaching the festive period as I'm recording this, they're going to help you work out what happens next for you. Welcome to What Happens Next. In 2025, I'm looking at the videos that I've produced now, I've talking about the fact that retirement is broken. I've used African philosophy to explain what we think about in terms of community well-being. I've talked about loneliness. I've talked about daily habits. I've talked about the importance of Stoicism and the impact it can have on our lives. And I've shared with you why I slept one night a couple of months ago on the streets, not only to raise money for charity and raise awareness, but to support and contribute to my local community. But there's 3 videos over the course of the past year that have resonated massively with you, because they're our 3 most watched videos. In position 3, we talked about why you should consider thinking about spending more money and giving more money away earlier than you think, and why planning for inheritance is an important thing to do really early. I suppose with the 2024 changes in the UK budget and the 2025 changes, gifting and spending money has become more prominent in a lot of people's minds. And that's why I wanted to do a video on how to think about gifting and saving when you know that you're financially secure enough to do so, and the steps that you should take to make sure that you've got the right plan in place to gift appropriately. Let's watch that video now. In the past 9 months, I've had a lot more conversations about the subject of inheritance. One of the conversations I always have with clients is the desire to take your hard-earned wealth and make sure that both your kids and grandkids benefit from that work. But here's the thing. Since the October 2024 budget, more assets that were previously out of the regime of inheritance tax are now included. And that includes pensions. So in 2027, pension pots will certainly be included for the purposes of inheritance tax. So as I recall this, the conversations I have with clients about inheritance tax are going back to explore the 2 simplest ways to mitigate inheritance tax. Number 1, spend more money whilst you're alive on the things you want to do with your life, and that's certainly a conversation we have with clients. But in this video, I want to talk about the second one, and that's to gift money whilst you're still alive instead of waiting until your death to do it. There's 2 reasons why gifting money whilst you're around might be important. Firstly, gifting early might mean that you can plan better to mitigate inheritance tax. But secondly, you get the emotional and psychological benefits of, while still being alive, seeing that money spent on the people you love, actually enjoying it. So in today's video, I want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of gifting. We're going to talk about why you should and shouldn't gift. We're going to take a look at what the ancient philosophers talked about when they talked about gifting and what we can learn from it. And what we're also going to do is look at the 3 factors you need to work out before adopting a gifting strategy that not only works for you, but for generations to come. Seneca the Stoic was pretty blunt when he said, putting things off is the biggest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes and denies us the present by promising us the future. You see, the ancient Stoics felt that waiting until later was often a risk. And whilst we live in a completely different time, there's a recent book that shares Seneca's perspective, particularly about personal finance. Die with Zero by Bill Perkins is a clarion call to spend money on life's experiences on making us happy. And it aligns a lot with Seneca's quote by urging us to live more for today than tomorrow. However, I've got my own personal opinion on this. And whilst Seneca was pretty blunt, Die with Zero, the book, talks about the nuance and the fact that actually, when it comes to spending and investing and saving, and also gifting, which we're going to talk about in this video, there is an importance in making sure we've got the right balance. Spending your hard-earned wealth on things you're going to love is important, but we need to get the balance right so that uncontrolled and excessive spending doesn't leave us in the poorhouse. Ultimately, getting that balance right is vital. And while Seneca didn't talk that much about gifting while still alive, one of the other prominent Stoic philosophers talked about it a lot. You see, Marcus Aurelius wrote an entire treatise on gifting, highlighting the fact that we should give as we receive, cheerfully, quickly, and without hesitation. For there is no grace in the benefit that sticks to the fingers. And Epictetus had a great quote: never second guess an instinct to be generous, especially with friends and family. Now, before we start thinking about gifting to the people we love or a cause we believe in, I believe the first step is to work out why we're doing it. So what would be your why if you're thinking about gifting whilst you're still around? For some of my clients, it's about supporting the people they love and like and seeing the wealth they've accumulated work whilst they're still around so they can see the benefits. For some of my clients, gifting, either in money or time, is about helping causes they really believe in. And for some of my clients, gifting is about protecting their future legacy. So before we start to think about the numbers and the values of the amounts we're going to gift, what's the why? What's the reason that you think you'd really like to give today? Is it to help the people you love? Or is it to have a positive impact on the world? Or is it to protect the assets you've accumulated, the wealth you've built, and make sure they get passed down the generations? All are entirely valid reasons, but taking the time to understand why you might want to gift is the first step I'd take. Part 2 is working out you're enough. Because I'm a real advocate of kindness, gifting generously, but doing it in a way that's sustainable. But it's really important when we think about stuff to also consider our own kindness to ourselves. And we do that by making sure that before we gift, we know how much is enough, we know we've got that number, and we know that we can sustainably live and make the gift. I'm on a real mission with What Happens Next to help people in their 50s, 60s and beyond plan for the next chapter of their life. And I'd like to ask a favour. If you're getting a lot from this video, feel free to like and subscribe. But we've also got some free gifts I'd love to give you to benefit your journey into what happens next in your life. If you look at the description of the video below, you'll find 3 links. Link number 1 will take you to our What Happens Next quiz, where you can get a real understanding of how prepared you are for the next chapter of your life. Link number 2 is to the waiting list for the What Happens Next book. That's coming out early in 2026. So to be one of the first people to get access to that book, please click on the link and you can join the waiting list. And if you'd like to know what we're doing on What Happens Next on an ongoing basis so you can benefit, you can also become part of the What Happens Next inner circle and get notified pretty regularly of what we're up to. Hopefully that's useful. Let's get back to the video. Now, I did a video, it's one of our most popular videos on What Happens Next, that talks about the steps you can take to work out your own version of financial independence. I'll put a link in the comments below. But I'd suggest that if you don't know what your number is, you don't know how much is enough for you, a step to take before thinking about gifting is to just simply understand whether you've achieved enough. And that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't gift, but knowing that you've got clarity on where you are financially and how close you are to financial independence allows you to do one thing: make an informed choice. Number three is about the how much and how. Once you've worked out your why and you've worked out your number, your version of financial independence, you've got to decide on the answer to two questions. Firstly, knowing that you've got clarity on where you are when it comes to your own financial independence, then allows you to work out how much you can afford to gift. And secondly, knowing your why allows you to work out your how. And when it comes to how, there's a few factors to consider. Firstly, control. Is it a direct gift to the people you love, or would a trust arrangement be better? And if you're making a charitable gift, how do you make sure that the money you give has a direct positive impact? And what power and influence could you have over the money that's been used so that it's used in the right way? Secondly, it's important to consider tax. As I mentioned earlier in the video, if you're in the UK, because of the recent changes, gifting is certainly part of my clients' ongoing inheritance tax planning strategy, and you should definitely consider it for yours too. My one tip here is to plan as early as you can. If you want to make gifts to reduce inheritance tax, it might be worth speaking to a professional to help you with that, so that you can make sure that you're doing it in the most effective way possible. The reality is that normally for a gift to completely fall outside of your estate for the purposes of inheritance tax, it typically takes 7 years if that gift is what we call a potentially exempt transfer. Although the rules around inheritance tax are tricky, complex and nuanced. And that's why it's worth thinking about getting professional advice if you need to adopt a robust gifting strategy. But lastly, I want to talk about the one that never seems to get a mention. And I'd suggest that it's just as important, if not more important, than the other two. The importance of impact. I had a client recently who wanted to give a low six-figure sum to pay off their daughter's mortgage. I built the gift into their cash flow plan, the tool we use to ensure that clients got a really clear picture of their future and they could afford it. And it was interesting because the client said something that really resonated with me. Thanks, Chris. Being able to take the worry of debt away from my daughter is something I'm really grateful I'm able to do. Now, I like the idea of understanding your why and then working out your how, so that the money you give can make as much impact as possible. So it's worth asking this question every time you think about gifting. How do I make the gift so it's going to make the most positive impact? Doing so allows you to ensure that not only the beneficiary of the gift is as happy as possible, but because we know from the research that giving money away makes us happy, you get the benefit from it too. So gifting when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond is something you should certainly consider, but I'd suggest you take these 3 logical steps. Work out your why so you know where the money you gift is going to have the most impact. Work out your version of financial enough so you can understand how much you can gift, and then answer the important questions of how to gift and how much. Now, I've got a couple more insights that I think you'd really enjoy. For more information about working out your own version of enough, this video might be really useful. And because I like to mention the Stoics, as you might have noticed if you're a regular What Happens Next watcher, this video talks about the Stoic lessons we can use for retirement. That's it for today. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon. Our second most popular video is all about the Chinese-based philosophy of Taoism. Now, interestingly, we talk a lot about Stoicism on What Happens Next, but I think there's a lot to learn from both Western and Eastern philosophies. And Taoism, the concept of Taoism and its flexibility in terms of the challenges of life, I think are really important to think about when we're thinking about navigating to our next chapter. So let's watch that video now. If someone were to ask me which of the schools of philosophy has been the most helpful and useful in my own life, I'd definitely say Stoicism. I've been consistently surprised about how many modern life lessons we can learn from the ancient Greek and Roman Stoics. And I also know the Stoics have unique insights into your journey when you're approaching retirement or whatever happens next. But here's the thing. No philosophy have got the monopoly on good ideas. And whilst I'm a fan of Western philosophy, I think that the Eastern philosophies, particularly the ancient ones, have unique insights too. So in today's video, I want to focus on Taoism and how Taoism and the philosophies and principles of Taoism can apply to your retirement. And I'm going to share 7 lessons from Taoism you can use practically to live your best retirement or whatever happens next in the next chapter of your life. Now, I've been thinking a lot recently about the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. Because actually, there's plenty of information and knowledge out there, more than ever before. But interestingly, with all of this information and knowledge at our fingertips, on our phones, on our computers, where do we get true wisdom from in the modern age? Now, I think the Stoics had a lot of wisdom thousands of years ago about the principles to live a good life. But I also think there's a lot to be said from some of the Eastern philosophies, particularly when we're thinking about our own next chapter of our lives, that chapter of our lives where we've been working and accumulating wealth for a significant time and thinking about what happens next. And I think there's 7 clear principles of Taoism, the ancient Chinese philosophy, that we can use to help us with retirement. The first principle I want to talk about is going with the flow. Because in Taoism, there's a principle called Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action or not doing. And that doesn't mean being lazy or doing nothing at all. Rather, it's about flowing with events instead of constantly pushing against the tide. And I believe there's a life lesson here because the Taoists talk about going with the flow, whereas the Stoics used to talk about focusing on what we can control, not worrying about the things we can't, but also amor fati, embracing life with all its nuance and shadows and dark and light, and living knowing that we're grateful and lucky to live through all of it. The good news is often, and this is my experience of speaking to my clients as a chartered financial planner, is that when we hit our 50s and 60s, we're starting to look like what a decent, natural flow looks like for us and how we can make the most of a bit more time. And that often includes having more time for ourselves and a bit more headspace. There's a brilliant book on this subject called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, written by the amazingly named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Took me a few times to pronounce that one, I can tell you. And that book talks about getting us into a flow state and experiencing deeper enjoyment and greater creativity. We've all been there when we've done something and time has seemed to fly. And often that's because you've entered that flow state. So the Taoists knew what modern psychologists now talk about. Focusing on finding flow instead of constantly pushing might be a healthier and happier way to live our lives. So let me ask you a question. Where in your life could benefit from letting things unfold more naturally instead of pushing so hard? And how do you get yourself into that flow state where you're doing something so intensely but enjoying it so much? And how do you get more of that in your life? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. And without further ado, let's talk about principle 2, which is finding balance. Life from a Taoist perspective is all about balance. harmonizing forces in our lives in a complementary way. And often in Taoism, that's symbolized by the yin yang, black and white swirls that connect each other with a dot in each. I'm sure you know the symbol, you've seen it loads of times. In nature, we see this balance everywhere. Day and night, seasons of growth and seasons of rest. And the Stoics knew this. One famous Stoic quote is, nature operates in balance. There's time for everything and nothing is rushed. Now, applying balance when we're thinking about what happens next can be very practical. The temptation is, after years of work, a very yang in Taoism pursuit. It might be in your head to go into a period of your lives where all you're doing is relaxing. So Taoist wisdom suggests you have a mix. You balance activity with rest. You balance being social with solo, quiet, considered time. And this element of balance is why we talk about what happens next, the balanced well-being model, and why actually thinking about our lives in a greater degree of balance, like the Taoists do, is a really important principle of a successful retirement or whatever happens next in your life. Now, all of the principles that I'm talking about, and I talk about on all of my What Happens Next videos, will be in the What Happens Next book. To be one of the first people to read the book and get your hands on the book and potentially get a signed copy, feel free to join the waiting list. The link below is in the comments, or simply, if you're not watching this on your phone, take a photo on your phone of this QR code. It will take you directly to the waiting list, so you can be one of the first people to get access to the What Happens Next book. However, the important thing when we're thinking about balance is to dispel the myth of perfect balance. The reality is we can look at other people's lives and assume they've got it all sorted out and they've got the perfect balance. The reality for me and for my clients when I talk to them is finding balance takes work, but also takes a degree of recalibration every now and again to make sure that you remain on track. But a big question to ask when you're thinking about balance is, how do you balance your time? How do you balance time between doing the stuff you love and like, but also taking time for you? And what incremental actions, what tiny little steps can you take to make sure that you're recalibrating to make sure that balance works for you? Taoist principle number 3 I want to talk about is the importance of embracing simplicity. It's interesting. A lot of the conversations I have with my clients about retirement and what they really want to be doing, it's the simple stuff that comes up time and time again. It's the time spent with grandkids, walking the dog, a good quality coffee, travelling but in a meaningful way. Now, I've spoken about the importance of working out what your enough is financially on this channel before, and we'll put a link to the video where I talk all about that in the comments. But Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said it best when he said, "He who knows he has enough, or she, is rich." Now, whilst I'm not convinced by the phrase, "the best things in life are free," is entirely true, many things that I love can be achieved at a relatively low cost. Spending time with people you love and like can be free. Being in nature is free. But evidence shows that constantly striving for more, be that money or stuff or praise, means that psychologically we're never going to be enough. So the question that I'd ask you here, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, is what's the one thing you could simplify in your life right now? Is there a possession, commitment, or worry that you could release to feel lighter? By thinking about what enough means in your life, you might already discover you have what you need to live a happier, healthier life full of well-being. Let's talk about principle number 4 and the importance of nature in our lives. Now, last year I moved house to the Essex coast. And to be perfectly honest, as a Londoner, somebody who lived in quite an urban environment for many years, I wasn't sure the move was a particularly positive one for me. But where I live now, I'm 10 minutes away from the forest, but also 10 minutes away from the estuary, that leads onto the sea. And there is a huge advantage into being close to nature. I read a book recently called Dose, written by neuroscientist TJ Power. And in this book, TJ talks about the fact that being in and close to nature enhances many of the chemicals in our brain that lead to positive emotions. The Taoists knew this too, and the philosophy and the evidence is now clear. Spending a decent amount of time in nature is brilliant for us. So the question is, what small step can you take to spend a bit more time being surrounded by the natural world? Let's move on to principle 5, and that's letting go. My experience is that often when clients retire, they're also letting go of a lot. Not only are they letting go of income, they're also letting go of their old identity and often some of their purpose. Throughout life, we accumulate loads of different attachments. Our professional identity, job titles, daily roles, and even some of those certain ego-driven ambitions. Stepping into retirement can feel like a loss because letting go of that career that gives you life structure and purpose is difficult. And for some of us, the right thing to do as we enter retirement or later in our lives is to downsize and get rid of some of our possessions, literally, physically letting go of stuff. Now, Taoism talks about the fact that if we cling too tightly to things that are naturally changing, we create unnecessary pain for ourselves. Instead, there is a real freedom in accepting change and effectively disentangling ourselves from the past. You are not your job. You are not your stuff. You are whatever you choose to be. And as your life changes and changes form, you need to make sure that you're able to let go of whatever is in the past so you can really focus on what happens next. So the question that I'd ask in this area is, what elements of your life, if you're approaching retirement, do you think you're going to struggle with letting go the most? And how and what can you do to make that transition a little bit easier and make sure it's as smooth as it can be? Taoist principle number 6, one that I really love, is be like water. Because if there's one visual image that the Taoists love, it's water. Lao Tzu talked about the fact that water is gentle and unyielding, but given time, it will break the strongest rock. And that's what the Taoists talked about all the time. Being rigid leads to breakage. Being flexible leads to resilience. And think of water flowing around rocks in a stream. It doesn't try and smash through the rocks. It simply flows in the available space, but is patient, consistent, and persistent. And in time can even wear down the stone. I think there's real value in the Taoist principles here when we're thinking about what happens next. Resilience, flexibility, the ability to adapt, change, and evolve are all really important skills to have when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives. There is going to be change and challenge when we think about retirement, but allowing us to be more flexible, both in what we know, what we learn, what we understand, and adapt that growth mindset is going to allow us to retire more successfully. One of the things we talk about a lot and what happens next is the benefits of low-cost experimentation. Now, not all of these experiments are going to be successful, but trying stuff out to see what works is a really important step when we're thinking about what happens next. And actually being flexible enough to try new stuff is the Taoist principle in action. You might try a new activity like a yoga class or join a local club, but find that it might not be your cup of tea. However, the power of flexibility lets you shrug and say, that's all right, I'll try something else tomorrow. Flexibility and curiosity go hand in hand as well. And we know that in our 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond, a growth mindset, the ability to make sure that we're continuing to evolve and learn, is fundamentally important to live happier, healthier lives. So the question I'd ask in this area is, in what areas of your life could you be a little bit more like water? Are you holding on to any rigid routines or beliefs that might be better served with a little bit of flexibility and ultimately resilience as you move into this chapter of your life. The interesting thing about stories is they're just stories that we tell ourselves. And interestingly, what we need to consider sometimes is whether those stories serve us or hold us back. Principle number 7, and one which I'm increasingly thinking about a lot, particularly when modern technology doesn't allow us to do this well, is be present. Taoist philosophy reminds us that being fully present and enjoying the journey is an important thing to do. After decades often striving towards goals, financial or otherwise, and future milestones, it can feel unfamiliar to slow down and simply be in the now. Yet this might be the greatest opportunity we've got in this chapter of our lives. The opportunity to enjoy and savour every day without the hustle, bustle, rushing of working life. So my recommendation is take the time today to celebrate the small wins and be grateful. And the question that I'd ask here, and I'd love for you to answer this in the comments, is what are the small wins you can celebrate today, and how can you make today a good day, even if it's a super ordinary one? So I believe Taoists can teach us a thing or two about retirement. What do you think? I'd love to know in the comments. But I want to make sure that you've got as much perspective as possible when you're thinking about your retirement. So I want to share 2 more videos. This one talks about the Stoic rules of retirement. And this video talks about the Stoic lessons you can learn from to help you live whatever you want to do in the next chapter of your life. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon. And I'm really pleased this video got to number 1 in 2025, because we talk a lot about change. We talk a lot about psychology. We talk a lot about the challenges that thinking about what happens next might face. But what happens next can be really exciting. And part of the reason, particularly for a lot of my clients, is the opportunity and the time to travel more. So I'm really pleased that on the top spot for our non-interview video of 2025 is the 12 retirement travel destinations you shouldn't miss. Now, on that video, I talked about some of the big things you can do, but also some simpler things. But I'm sure that watching this now, you'll find one that perfectly suits your next journey, particularly now you're thinking about having a bit more time in your hands. Start the video. When I ask my clients what they're going to do with the extra time they've got once they retire, sell their business, or navigate to the next chapter of their lives, one theme comes up time and time and time again. They want to travel more. And if that's you, you're definitely not alone. But here's the thing. With the breadth and width of places we can travel greater than ever, how do we actually decide on the places we go? Now, where you decide to venture is clearly up to you. And I'm sure you've got places on your list you definitely want to go. But this video is all about inspiration. So without further ado, and based on places I've been fortunate enough to go to, my clients have told me about, and thorough research, here's the 12.5 places I believe you need to add onto your retirement travel bucket list today. I've been fortunate enough to live a life which has included so far a decent amount of travel. A life where I've travelled to places and experienced things I never would have dreamed of as a kid. However, and here's the exciting thing for me, as I get into my 50s, 60s and beyond, I intend to travel more. And if you're in your 50s and 60s and thinking about travelling more, this video is for you. If you don't know who I am, my name's Chris Daems. I'm a chartered financial planner, not a travel agent. And I find myself having a lot of conversations with clients about, now they've got a bit more time, the places they want to go. So I wanted to create a video that was about inspiration, based on places I've been, and I think I've got 12.5 places for you to think about when you're thinking about your next trip. And I've got a feeling travel tip number 9 and travel tip number 10 might be a little controversial and you might not agree with it. But without further ado, let's start with number 1. and that is Marrakesh. Now, for me, Marrakesh is an amazing combination of vibrant markets, beautiful scenery, and some of the strangest sights, particularly in the Medina, in the square, I've ever seen. But I loved it. When you're in Marrakesh, try the tagine. My favourite is the lamb tagine, beautiful, and definitely have a mint tea. Both Moroccan delicacies that are definitely worth trying. And if you're anything like Cassie and I, you'll end up buying a tagine pot that you probably thought you were going to use a bit more when you got it home, that sits in the cupboard quite a lot of the time. Full disclosure, I wasn't too keen on the souks. I thought the maze-like markets and the haggling weren't for me. However, what I did love is the trip we made to the Atlas Mountains, and I definitely recommend visiting the Berber villages up there and visiting the waterfalls. Travel recommendation number 2 is Tokyo and Kyoto in Japan. I was fortunate enough to, in 2019, visit Tokyo and Kyoto with my daughter Charlotte, and I can definitely say it was one of the most mind-blowing, eye-opening travel experiences of my life. The experience that I got to share with Charlotte, and the combination between the super modern and the ancient of Japan, great food, travelling on the bullet train, walking across the Buya Crossing, and singing karaoke, making Tokyo amazing fun. In Kyoto, I love the Golden Palace, the Bamboo Forest, the Torii Gate, and loads more. And Charlotte and I were fortunate enough to stay in a ryokan, and I had the strangest experience because I got woke up way too early in the morning with a lady who gave me a 6-course fish and rice breakfast, which probably would only happen in Japan. Because of my experience in Japan and the fascinating culture of Japan, I often talk to my clients and friends about it. And I've never known anybody who's been to Japan who didn't get something from the experience. I loved it, and I know you will too. My third tip is not somewhere I've been, but interestingly, I've had a client who's recently come back and a guest who we've interviewed on What Happens Next, a guy called Ian Price, who's recently done this trip. And that's an Antarctic cruise. And what they tell me is they had experiences on this cruise they'd never forget. They learned a lot about the wildlife and the nature in those regions. They got to kayak, they got to go ashore in places that are virtually untouched. And the accommodation, both Ian and my client told me, was pretty nice too. My fourth travel tip is cycling on an e-bike into Scotland or the Napa Valley or anywhere you want. Now, I haven't graduated to an e-bike yet. I've got my mountain bike I use for my local forest and my road bike I use to commute to work. The only places I've used an e-bike is actually London and Paris, and they're the sort of Uber line bikes that you can get. Now, you can take an e-bike virtually anywhere, but I'd consider the 2 places I know do e-bike tours, places that certainly are worth visiting, are the Napa Valley in California, and maybe go around tasting some lovely wine while you're there, and the Scottish Highlands, maybe tasting some lovely whiskey. However, regardless of where you choose to go on your e-bike, it is a way to stay healthy, stay fit, see beautiful scenery, and travel differently. My 5th travel tip is based on a conversation I had with one of our brilliant guests on What Happens Next, Damien Stankham, and that is completing the Camino Trail. The Camino Trail is a walking experience which typically ends at the Cathedral of Santiago in northern Spain. Now, you can start the trail in different places. Damien, who was the guest on What Happens Next, started it in Portugal, but actually there's trails that run through France and through Spain. And everybody I've spoken to who's walked the Camino Trail says to me that the scenery is beautiful, but also the company you have walking along these beautiful roads with beautiful scenery is amazing. For Damien and for other people I've spoken to about the Camino Trail, walking in beautiful scenery with interesting people is a way to experience life, to relax, to spend time in nature, which we know is good for us. And an opportunity to think and reflect. The sixth travel recommendation comes from my dad, and my dad loves to travel as well. And one of the places that he always talks about going that he found amazing is Petra in Jordan. My dad got the opportunity to visit Petra about 10 years ago, and honestly, he's never stopped talking about it since. You start by walking through a dramatic canyon before you approach the majestic Rose City with its sandstone carved buildings on display. There's hidden tombs, amphitheatres, and the engineering's amazing considering how old the site is. My dad told me how shocked he was about how fantastically preserved the buildings were, mainly because of the robustness of the rock, low rainfall, and shelter from the canyon, but how amazed he was that thousands of years ago, the technology existed to build these incredible structures. My next tip, and apologies if I butcher the pronunciation on this one, is Kaxlauton Arctic Resort. I've recently come back from Iceland, and I was amazed by the beautiful scenery and the brilliant people. However, one minor disappointment for Cassie, Sophie and I, my daughter and my wife, was that we didn't get the opportunity to see the Northern Lights. That's why I've added Kaxlauton to my must-visit travel list. This resort is nestled just above the Arctic Circle in Finland, and you get the opportunity to stay in a glass igloo in the wilderness. Whilst you're never guaranteed to see the Northern Lights, having the chance to potentially see them in such an amazing environment means that you have a great time whether you see them or not. My eighth travel tip I haven't been to, but again, it's one of those places where everybody I speak to who's been has loved it, and that's New Zealand. Everybody I speak to about visiting New Zealand tells me how friendly it is, how breathtaking the landscapes are, and how you can travel from the snow-capped Southern Alps through to the Golden Beaches, all the way through to lush forest in a few hours. There's also a lot of history and heritage in New Zealand, and the New Zealanders I've met and from people who've been to New Zealand have told me that New Zealanders are among the most friendliest people in the world. My ninth travel tip, and this is my first one you might not agree with, is visiting South Africa to shark dive in Cape Town. Now, you may consider shark diving in Cape Town as something that's right up your street, but I get why shark diving in Cape Town might be way off your list. However, the reason I mentioned shark diving in Cape Town is I remember a client telling me once that this was firmly on his bucket list. That was back in 2019, and his intention was to go in 2020. Unfortunately, COVID happened that meant he couldn't travel. And then he had some health issues that meant he couldn't go shark diving in Cape Town ever again. And recently, when I was writing the What Happens Next book, I decided to share this story about his plan to go and then how life got in the way, to reflect the fact that often we need to focus on getting the right balance between work and life. I believe this particular client didn't get the right balance between work and life and put off life a bit longer than he probably needed to. Now, the stories, tips, tricks and techniques I'm going to be talking about in the What Happens Next book, which is due to be published in early 2026, will help you get the right balance for your own life and make sure that the next chapter of your life is going to work for you. The book, as I say, isn't out until early 2026, but what you can do is join the waiting list today so that you're one of the first people to get your hands on a copy of the book. To do that, simply click in the comments below, or alternatively, if you're watching this on the screen and you've got your phone, click on this QR code. It will take you straight to the waiting list and you can join today. Now, my 10th tip is to visit the Amazon rainforest. I was fortunate enough with a group of friends and my brother to fly into Ecuador last year, fly into Quito, which is the capital city, drive to a little place called Puyo, and then take this tiny little plane deep into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. It was a trip that shifted my perspective on so much, including my life, my work, and everything else in between. spending some time in the Amazonian community, being so close to nature without technology, and having adventures with new friends were all highlights of the trip. And the fact that I got to share this adventure with my brother made it even more special. We swam down rivers, saw creepy crawlies, bathed in Amazonian waterfalls. We learned a lot about how the Amazonian communities live. And I believe travel is often at its best when you get to learn a new way of life, go on an adventure, as well as the opportunity to relax. Going to the Amazon was certainly for me an adventure, one with plenty of activity. But when it comes to creating memories, which I believe great travelers should do, it's one I'll never forget. My 11th travel tip is Ashford Castle in Ireland. For a travel experience that's a bit more relaxing, not the Amazon or travelling on a cruise to the Antarctic, you should consider Ashford Castle in County Mayo, Ireland. You can eat well, drink well, relax in the spa, but you can also try, if you want to do more activities, horseback riding, falconry, kayaking on the lake, and archery without leaving the grounds. Ashford Castle, when I did my research, has some impeccable reviews on TripAdvisor, talking about the warm service and the team at Ashford Castle making you feel like royalty. It seems like, I haven't been there, but it seems like a place definitely worth a visit. My 12th travel tip comes from a show that I love on Netflix called Somebody Feed Phil, and that's San Sebastian in Spain. Now, if you haven't seen Somebody Feed Phil, it's part travelogue and part food documentary, where Phil travels the world, visiting places and eating amazing food. And there was an episode of the show that came on recently where Phil visited a place called San Sebastian in Spain. The seafood looked amazing. The lovely desserts looked amazing. And I found, but when I was researching for this video, that San Sebastian has got more Michelin-starred dining establishments per capita than anywhere else in the world, apart from one place, Kyoto. So you know that the food's going to be pretty decent. San Sebastian also looks like it's from a lovely street you can easily walk around, and there's a decent chance, because there's a lot going on, that when you're there, there'll be a festival there too. My bonus tip is you should try a cruise. I tried a cruise a couple of years ago and was massively pleasantly surprised. Whilst one of the downsides is that you get less time on land than I probably would have actually liked, I love the fact that the food, drink and entertainment on board was of a really high quality, and the opportunity to visit so many places was really, really worth it. I did a Norwegian P&O cruise and also got the opportunity to hike to the top of Pulpit Rock, which has amazing views over the Norwegian fjords. And I'd certainly recommend you add a cruise, wherever you choose to go, on your travel list. So clearly any video of this type is going to be just a taster, just designed to inspire you and give you some ideas. But I'm really curious, where is on your travel list when you either retire or think about what happens next? And what should be on this list of 12 places that isn't? But also, tell me the places that you've been to that you definitely avoid and you'd recommend people not go to when they're thinking about their retirement travel list. When we're thinking about travel plans, I'd suggest too that we think about two other aspects. Number one, and the most popular current video on What Happens Next channel, is the video that talks about enough from a financial perspective. And in this video, I talk about the 3 steps you can take to get closer to your number, understanding what financial independence means to you, so you can have the travel plans of your dreams. And in this interview with a guy called John Dunkley, we talk about how the Greeks talked about happiness in terms of hedonic, eudaimonic, and chaironic well-being, and how can we live happier retirements and what happens next. That's it for today. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon. So that's it for our top 3 videos, non-interview of 2025. I'm really pleased that you've had the opportunity to continue this journey with us, and I hope you've got a lot out of watching our content in 2025. But we have got big plans for 2026. Not only are we launching the What Happens Next book, we're also launching the What Happens Next community and course. Now, you can sign up for the waiting list for the book and be one of the first people to read it. We've had some initial feedback and people reckon it's pretty good, by either clicking on in the comments below or simply taking your phone out if you're watching this on the screen and pointing it towards this QR code, and it will give you a link to the waiting list for the book. But if you're interested in the course we're going to be running, designed to help you consider, plan, and then implement your What Happens Next journey, the link's in the comments. Or you can use your phone, take a photo of the QR code below, and go straight to the waiting list for our community and the course. Hopefully that's useful. I'd also recommend that you watch 2 additional videos. This one is one I mentioned earlier on in the video about the concept of retirement potentially being a bit broken and what you can do to make sure that you're guiding yourself to a next chapter that works for you. And in this video, I talk about the ancient money wisdoms that actually continue to work for you in 2025, inspired by Stoicism. That's it for today. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon.